to figure out where we fit in as a diversity committee on this campus. And as the holidays started to come up, a lot of people had a lot of questions trying to figure out, well, what is Juneteenth? When we get the day off, what are we celebrating? What does that mean? And so we actually have Peggy Conklin on the campus that is a great history professor that can give us that knowledge. And so she has blessed us with her presence to be able to give us a lot more knowledge. And so hopefully today, what we will do is be able to come together, not only just eat and congregate, but also to gain wisdom as to what this holiday is. Monday, when we take the day off, what is it that we're celebrating? What is it that people have been through for us to have that day off? Because a lot of us just take a day off and just assume that that's a day to celebrate. But also we need to be mindful that a lot of people have been through a lot of things in order for us to have a lot of freedoms that we forget. And so at this time, what I would like to do is give the floor to Peggy Conklin, who is going to give us a lot of information about what it is that we're actually going to be celebrating on Monday. And again, I really want to thank you all, each and every one, for your support that you are giving this campus. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Keisha. I'm happy to be here, and I'm really thrilled with this turnout. And I'm especially thrilled to see some of my former students in the audience, and some of the former students who are now local dignitaries in the audience. I appreciate it a lot. I will tell you that I like to confess, tell what's going on, that I didn't realize we were going to be live. And so I told some of my friends as they were coming in, had I known, I would have made sure to take a little more care with my hair, and with my makeup, and maybe even with my clothing. Because I just thought we were going to be super casual. I mean, I still want to be that. So for you that are in here, feel free to stop, ask a question. I'll give time at the end also for questions. And for those of you who are observing and watching, you'll just have to bear with the casualness of it, and hopefully it'll be informative and helpful to you as well. As Keisha mentioned, I've taught history for many years. I've taught here on the Whitesburg campus since 2002. And as a part of the American history classes and the women's history classes that I've taught, we talk about the African American experience and the African American struggle, and we learn the history, the horrible dark history of slavery. And so today is kind of a wonderful thing, because we're talking about celebration, because that's what Juneteenth really is. It's a hallelujah, praise the Lord celebration, because of a very historic moment that happened. And so as we go through the material that I've kind of put together in the PowerPoint, I'll interject some other things. This is just basically an outline to kind of keep us focused. Never been a real big PowerPoint person. I'm much more of an extemporaneous speaker, but I think it can be helpful as long as the speaker isn't standing and reading the slides. So I'm going to try not to do that. But there's something hypnotic. Have you noticed that? Seriously, there's something hypnotic about a PowerPoint for both the speaker and the audience. When that's up there, your audience, you tend to just focus on that. And the speaker also tends to. But let's try and not do that too much, and we'll use it as we need it. I may even forget to advance the slide. Those of you who've had me in class know, technology and me just always don't gel. But anyway, so let's start with kind of the beginning. When you hear Juneteenth, it's like, Juneteenth, what's that? And everybody was all excited last year because we got a holiday and like, woohoo, day off. But what's it about? I mean, it has incredible historical, cultural, and spiritual relevance to it. The Juneteenth, the way that the word came about to describe the celebration was June 19th. And we're going to talk about why June 19th was specifically significant. But it's just combining June and 19th and making it Juneteenth. So that, just to kind of let you know, hopefully that makes some sense. I'm not going to go all the way back in history to the origins of slavery. We just really don't have time to do that, so we're going to stay focused. But I'm kind of interested to know what your knowledge base is. When was slavery ended in the United States? Most people would probably answer Emancipation Proclamation, 1863. Show of hands, how many of you would raise your hand to that? That's when slavery ended in the United States. Okay. I've got some really brave people who are willing to raise their hands. I was getting ready to say, hey, if no hands go up, I'm going to assume you're either terribly shy or you just don't know. I'm not sure which. Let me talk about this for a second. And my former students in here know I covered this obviously in the U.S. history class. Abraham Lincoln began drafting the Emancipation Proclamation in 1862, in the fall of 1862, because, quite frankly, he had some big problems. One of the problems was morale in the Union Army, but perhaps even a bigger problem for him was the threat of Great Britain coming into the war on the side of the South. Now, you might wonder, why in the world would anybody come in on the side of the South? Because we think about it in the way we look at things today. Economics, some things aren't different, are they? Britain, textile manufacturing was a huge part of their economy. Guess where the number one source of their cotton was? The American South. And so they had long-standing relationships with the South because of the growth of cotton, and that was their number one textile. So there had been some communication, some talk about the South and Britain kind of coming together. How disastrous would that have been for the Union effort if that had occurred? Yeah, I mean, it could have changed the whole course of everything. And so Lincoln took it off the table with the Emancipation Proclamation. It was really a political move, a brilliant political move, because he knew that disapproval for slavery in Britain was really at a high level. And so by framing the war, and that's what he did, he essentially reframed the war from being about preserving the Union, go back and look at his speeches, to now being about when we march into those southern states, we are freeing the slaves. Now, this is a topic that's too complex for us to talk about in a brief lecture. You really kind of need to take a class on that. But he needed, it's not that the war wasn't about slavery, but it's just that wasn't sort of the things that were said officially. And so now what he's doing when he issues this proclamation is he simply says that the states that are in rebellion, meaning they've seceded from the Union, when the troops go in and there is a Union presence in those states, then the slaves in those states will be freed. This did not free all slaves in the United States. It didn't even free all slaves in the South, as we will see. First point, border states. Kentucky. Kentucky was one of the last states to let go of slavery. Kentucky was not in rebellion. So therefore, the Emancipation Proclamation did not apply to the individuals who lived in Kentucky. Delaware is another example. But now we're going to talk about here in a minute a situation with a deep South state where that didn't even apply. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So yes, the Emancipation Proclamation freed many slaves, but it really wasn't doing anything new. That was already happening as the Union armies were going into these states. But now Lincoln makes it official. When he does that, it takes Britain off the table because the political leadership in Britain were not going to support the South because it was such an unpopular thing in Britain. So it's kind of interesting how political ploys also work here, obviously, to a greater benefit and to a larger benefit. So was it the 13th Amendment then, in 1865, that ended slavery in America? How many would raise their hand to that? Again, I don't know if you're shy or you just don't want to say, so I'll jump in here. The 13th Amendment did formally end slavery in the United States of America. But you know, there's one thing to technically end something and another thing for it to truly end. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into the depth of this. I don't want to get too bogged down here. But yes, that is the amendment that formally ends slavery. And some of you may have learned in school, I remember we had a little formula in school, the 13th Amendment freed slaves, the 14th Amendment made them citizens, and the 15th Amendment granted the right to vote. Should we really have had to have a 14th and a 15th Amendment? Probably not. But the reason we had to have them is because the southern states were so resistant. They fought long and hard to subvert those amendments. So, and like I said, we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. So, why did it not end with the Emancipation Proclamation I've covered? Why did it not end with the 13th Amendment? Because people were dedicated to retaining it. So what's the significance then of June 19th? That goes back to the Emancipation Proclamation. Texas, cotton-growing state, large southern state. The Union really, militarily, had not done much in the western states, the western South. And so there was not a Union presence there when the Emancipation Proclamation was issued. So it did not actually happen in Texas until General Galveston arrived. June 19th, 1865, announced that, hey, we're enforcing the Emancipation Proclamation, so all the slaves in Texas are free. They didn't have Twitter, Facebook, email, telephones. So how would word then get around to people in the state of Texas? Well, it took a while. A lot of it was word of mouth. A lot of it was, announcing it at town meetings and those kinds of things. So would it surprise you to know that a lot of the individuals in Texas that had been slaves didn't know they were free? Did that surprise anybody? Yeah, not knowing that, right? And so Texas had really grown in population during the Civil War because a lot of the slave owners and cotton producing individuals had gone to Texas because of the Emancipation Proclamation. The Union was in their states and in their areas. And so they're like, hey, let's go to Texas. Not a Union army down there. We can go ahead and proceed as planned. And so when this occurred on June 19th, 1865, some of the cotton farmers just didn't reveal that information to their former slaves because they needed the harvest to come in. And so they thought, well, we'll just wait until the harvest is over and then we'll tell them. And so some did not learn for months later that they were free. But once the word did spread, obviously there were huge celebrations, you know. You can only imagine. I mean, I can't imagine. We can try and imagine what that must have been like. But I think if you take a moment and reflect upon it, wow. Of course, there were celebrations. Of course, people were like singing and cheering and getting together and hugging and crying and having parties and, you know, just complete happiness. That did not mean, though, that everything was going to be smooth, did it? Because we already talked about that. Things are not going to be just automatically okay now. But this became a thing in Texas, 250,000 free. And there were celebrations all over the place. People, you know, as people heard the news and heard the word about it. So I want to talk here for a minute a little bit more about this 13th Amendment. So in December of that year, the 13th Amendment was ratified. Did any of you see the movie Lincoln, Daniel Day-Lewis movie a few years ago, won the Academy Award? I highly recommend the movie. And it shows the struggle, the political struggle that was going on in Washington as Abraham Lincoln and others were attempting to get this amendment ratified and what it meant when it was ratified. Because now it is a part of the Constitution. It's not a law, it's not a policy, it is a part of the Constitution. And again, while there may not have been freedom everywhere with the granting of the 13th Amendment, it puts it on paper, it puts it into the Constitution. It means then that we're going to get there. You know, it's law now. It is in the Constitution. So some of you may have been familiar with this because you've had some of my classes. But what kinds of things went on after the 13th Amendment to try to keep slavery in some form or in place in some way in the South? Anybody remember any of the things that happened? Well, states passed some laws and local areas passed laws. There were things like the Black Codes, for example, where technically, yeah, you're free down in Georgia, or you're free in Texas, but you have to be an agricultural worker. Is that freedom? No. It's like, we'll pay you wages now, but you're limited to one endeavor, one area of work. And if that's the only area of work you can do, what do you think's going to happen with your wages on top of that? So that's one example. African Americans were not allowed to travel freely in a lot of southern states. They had to get a pass that gave them official authorization to travel around. Is that freedom? No. So even though we've got a 13th Amendment that says technically no slavery in the United States of America, the reality was different, wasn't it? And I think that's so important to know, and a lot of people do not realize that. Voting. Isn't that a part of being a free-born citizen of this country? Obviously. But there was so much resistance. And so the 14th Amendment was passed saying, listen, people, we said that slavery was ended. You all are trying to do things to impede the rights of these citizens. And we're telling you right now you can't do it. The freed slaves are citizens. Now, I do want to make a mention, because I teach women's history and I can't not make this mention. The rights that they enumerated were the right to vote. But they were only extending that to male citizens. No one believed women should vote. That's kind of a whole other topic and a whole other issue, but I have to say. So you would have thought that would have been the end of it, right? Southern constitutions, state constitutions were even required to write into their constitution that the 14th Amendment was in force in their state before they could come back in during Reconstruction. No, then we've got all kinds of other antics and things going on, some of which, of course, as we know the horrible story, was outright violence. You know, the birth of the Ku Klux Klan and trying to intimidate people not to vote, on top of these local ordinances and local policies. The 15th Amendment comes back again and says, look, do we have to keep saying the same thing? They get to vote. African American men can vote. They are citizens. And so then they came up with some other clever things like grandfather clauses that said, yeah, we allow African American men to vote in our state if their granddaddy could vote in the state. Well, what did that mean then? They couldn't vote. So I don't want to labor too long into it, but there were all kinds of things like this: poll taxes, various literacy tests, where if you were an African American, you came in to take you had to take a literacy test before you could vote. Let me tell you something. There were many southern states where there were more African American people who were literate than there were white people who were literate. The state of education in the South was pathetic. There was no real public school system, but I would guarantee you could look state by state and find higher literacy among the African American community. But what they would do then when someone would come in to take a literacy test, they would say, oh, so-and-so, I know, you go on in. You know, you can see how these things could be done to manipulate. Just such an interesting and at the same time horrible period in American history, this struggle, this long struggle. And of course it wasn't even going to be over, was it? Even after they eliminated these things. You had the Plessy versus Ferguson ruling at just a couple years before we move into the 20th century, saying you can have separate but equal. And then of course Dr. King and Fannie Lou Hamer and Rosa Parks and Joanne Robinson and all these people launched a civil rights movement in the 1950s because African Americans were still not being allowed to vote and discriminated against in every aspect of society. So this is a topic almost too large to cover in a brief thing. So we're happy today. I just had to give you some sad things too, but we're happy today because Juneteenth is a happy celebration. With the wrong way. With my, oh, here we go. Am I going backwards? Hang on, here we go. I told you technology. Y'all thought I was lying. So the history of this happy celebration, thank the Lord celebration, started in Texas. And so the very next year, you had what they called it Jubilee Day. It was just informal and spontaneous. And it became a part of Texas culture, particularly and obviously with the African American community. As people migrated out of Texas, they took the Juneteenth celebration with them. And of course, particularly mid-20th century, when the World War II and then manufacturing jobs that were opening up in the North, African American families, many of them migrated north to Chicago and Cleveland and other industrial cities, hoping to find work. I don't want to go too deep into the weeds here, but it was not an easy situation. But what they took with them was this celebration. And so it started to grow and become a part of many different communities and many different locations in the United States. it really picked up a lot of steam in the 60s and 70s, as you had much more activism in the African American community, and of the civil rights movement, and all of those things were happening. And so some families really adopted this. And I would really encourage you to go to the Smithsonian, to the Museum of African American History. They have some great oral histories on there where people talk about what this holiday means to their family. There was one woman who talked about it was a bigger deal to them than just about anything. And she said, you know, July 4th is just around the corner. She said, we would go to July 4th celebrations, but she said our family was all about Juneteenth. And that was our big celebration and the thing that we celebrated. And then, of course, she found others who came into it a little bit later in life, who heard about it and found out about it, particularly with this renewed interest in African American history that you saw in the 70s and the 80s. As historians found out more about it and shared it, and so it just kind of has kept on growing. It's gained a whole lot of momentum. Texas in 1979 made Juneteenth a national holiday in their state. And then, of course, last year, President Biden signed the proclamation to make it an official federal holiday. So that's kind of the history behind it. So let's talk about the culture behind it. Let me stop for a second. Anybody have any questions? Have I confused you all terribly, or are you kind of with me? Let me check in here. Okay. The celebration over time has evolved, as culturally we've all evolved. But certain things are in common. So let's talk about the things in common, and then also how maybe it's changed a little bit over time. Food, family, fun, faith, those kinds of things. When you look at the African American community, there's such a rich, rich heritage of the connection between family and faith, fellowship. All of those words I think have really, really deep meaning. And so the first part of any celebration is getting your family together. And that family means also even your extended family, and can mean your community, your whole little area where you live. And so family has such a broad context here. Both we think of it nuclear, but think of it in a larger sense. And you gotta bring food, right? We've got food here today, which was so appropriate. And I think Keisha was probably very intentional in that, in having food here, because that's really at the heart of it. Some of the first Juneteenth celebrations was, like barbecue contests. Everybody bring in a barbecue and kind of compete with one another over whose barbecue is best. Picnics, potlucks, all of those wonderful things that I think we can all relate to when we think about family and church and those things. We think about getting together, breaking bread, so to speak, and gathering around the table and just having that wonderful, wonderful fellowship. And so that's always a part of any Juneteenth. Well, let's be real, it's a part of any celebration. We gotta have some food, and we want to have some fun. And so there's lots of music is embedded in it. And both the food and the music have changed over time, haven't they? I think certain things are probably always standard, but, you're starting to see more variety, I think, sometimes with the food. As, well, I want to eat healthier, so I'm going to bring this dish, or, my heritage is mixed, so I think I want to bring some of this to the Juneteenth celebration. When we think about music, again, so integral to the African American experience. A lot of people don't realize, they don't understand how much of our contemporary music is influenced by the African American experience. We think about bluegrass around here. How many know that the banjo was an African American musical instrument? So all kinds of music. And I'm sure today, if you went to a Juneteenth celebration, you'd be hearing some Beyonce and some Jay-Z, right? Or some of the other important artists in the hip-hop and the rap community. Whereas if we're talking about, 1900, it would be a different type of music, obviously. The song most associated with the Juneteenth celebrations and is now known as the Black National Anthem, right, is Lift Every Voice and Sing. And when we close a little bit later, I'm going to play a beautiful a cappella version of that song. It's so deep with meaning. Written by a famous African-American poet, James Weldon Johnson, who put words to paper and then it was put to music. And it has just incredible significance to so many people. Children are often featured in Juneteenth celebrations, reading poems or writing their own original poems, doing other creative endeavors. So, you'll see a showcase of talent a lot of times, even if it's just the family. Just the immediate family. It's like, well, gotta hear this poem, or gotta hear this little one sing this song. And so I find that beautiful because I love children, and I think that it's wonderful that that's the heart of a lot of the celebrations. And as I already mentioned, it's something that has continued to grow in popularity. Now, Keisha told me that when she started working on this, she kind of went around asking people, do you know about Juneteenth? Well, everybody knew they now had a day off. But beyond that, not a whole lot of knowledge out there, right? Keisha, I think maybe one person kind of knew.
And actually, it ended up being two, because Pricey was one of our segments.
So you had two?
Yes.
Okay, because I knew Pricey, now who was the other one?
I think it was her, Quaden.
Oh,
Yep.
Quaden, one of our tutors,
Yes.
from the tutoring center, cool. So now I feel like, or I hope, that you have a bit more of a feel for what Juneteenth is. And the reason I wanted to flavor it and not just talk about the celebration was because I wanted you to understand the struggle. Because if you don't understand the struggle, you've missed the whole thing. You've missed the heart and the soul and the spirit of it. And so that's something that we can all appreciate. And so I hope that that's helped a little bit. Are there any questions that I can answer? How are we doing on time? Am I over? Because my students know this. I can talk forever about something. Oh, I'm doing pretty good, actually. I've actually had classes where I'll be 10 minutes overtime and nobody's told me. Because I'm just so caught up. I'm so into it. And one day somebody's like, you're 10 minutes over. I'm like, I'm so sorry when you say something. Everybody's like, well, we didn't even notice we were having so much fun. They were enjoying it and just didn't pay attention. Or they were being nice and flattering the teacher. I'm not sure which of those things is actually true. So do you have anyone questions about anything? Comments? Anything you would like to share? Do you see any connections between this holiday and some of our other holidays? You can certainly see that July 4th one, right? And why to so many people, this is more important to them. That makes perfect sense. And I think a lot of times people get offended and they don't understand that. And the reason they get offended is because they're ignorant of the history of it. They just don't understand. And if you know, then it's like, oh, well, yeah, that makes perfect sense to me, of course. Of course that's a hugely important thing. Well, you all be thinking, because I got 3 minutes left. And I'm gonna go ahead and play this. Get out here. This a cappella version of this beautiful song.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won.
Thank you all again. Peggy, you did an outstanding job. Thank you very much for the information that you have given us. I think that all of us have a little bit more light shed on the situation, and we know a lot more walking way than we did when we came to the table. A lot of us haven't been fortunate enough to take classes under Peggy. So if you all have not, anyone that's watching that is interested, I think that as Peggy said earlier, this is a conversation that needs to continue. So please reach out to any of us here at Southeast. We would love for you to take a class under Peggy. She can give you more information about this. I think that would be outstanding to be able to take a class and learn more information about this. Thank you all, faculty, staff, family, past students, and our own Mayor Craft. Thank you again for attending, coming out, and having a great time. Thank you again.